What's going on? YouTube, listen up. Young Elder Gang. This is Dr. Charles P. Winston. At you with another banger. Please make sure you like, subscribe and share this video, fam. I hope this video get at least 100,000 likes in this video. You will find history definitions, scripture, information, and, best of all, what we Americans have been deprived of from the beginning. The truth, keep in mind, this content used in this video is intended for entertainment, educational and informational purposes only. We will give you the total truth as we best understand it. Today, be sure to hit that like button, Young Elder Gang, hit that subscribe button. If you're new to the channel, hit that bell, and don't forget to check back with us every day for new content. Thomas Sankara was born in 1949 under French colonial rule in Upper Volta. His father, a gendarme, served the French, granting the family borrowed privilege. Young Thomas saw the contradiction: privilege for a few, poverty for many. Drawn to the military, Sankara saw it as a way to serve his nation, not foreign masters. His family was disappointed, but Sankara dreamed beyond personal safety. He saw land stripped by colonialism, people left with little. The boy from Yako was already dreaming of a new nation. The journey had begun. The military academy was meant to produce loyal officers, but for Sankara it became a school of revolution. In 1970 he trained in Madagascar, where he witnessed student and worker uprisings against French influence. Theories he'd read about revolution came alive before his eyes. He excelled in his studies, but his real education was outside the classroom, devouring books on history, revolution and liberation. He saw the world as a battlefield between oppressors and the oppressed. In 1974, he fought in a border war with Mali, becoming a war hero, but saw the conflict as pointless, a war between two poor nations over barren land. This experience solidified his anti-imperialist stance. He recognized the real enemies, the systems and powers profiting from Africa's division. Sankara became known as a charismatic, incorruptible officer, and a musician connecting with people through music. Beneath the charm, he was building a network of young officers tired of corruption and endless coups. They were waiting, planning. The sword was being sharpened. Sankara's mind was a crucible of revolutionary ideas. He found language for his anger in Marx and Lenin, learning about class struggle and imperialism. He saw Upper Volta's elite as the local bourgeoisie, the masses as the proletariat. Political independence meant nothing without economic independence. He was inspired by African heroes like Patrice Lumumba, whose murder was both a warning and a call to action. He studied Samir Amin's theories on dependency and Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-Africanism. Sankara synthesized these ideas, adapting them to his country's reality. He wanted a revolution that worked in the real world, not just in books. His ideology was a weapon to liberate his people from poverty and foreign domination. He was ready to navigate the storm. Sankara's rise unsettled the old guard. As Secretary of State for Information, he rode a bicycle to cabinet meetings, a statement against elite excess. He exposed corruption, encouraged journalism, and resigned in protest when silenced. His arrest only made him more popular. Protests erupted. After another coup, he became Prime Minister, travelling the world and forging alliances with revolutionary leaders. His anti-imperialist vision alarmed France and its allies. Arrested again, Sankara's supporters ignited a popular uprising. On August 4, 1983, Blaise Compaoré led a coup that brought Sankara to power. That night, Sankara announced the National Council for the Revolution, a new dawn. The people celebrated. The long night of neo-colonialism was over. A year later, he renamed the country Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. The revolution had a name, a leader, and a dream. Sankara's presidency was a whirlwind of transformation. He declared Burkina Faso would rely on its own resources. Homeland or death, we will triumph. In 2 weeks, his government vaccinated 2.5 million children, an unprecedented feat. He launched literacy campaigns, built schools, and saw education as liberation. To fight desertification, he planted millions of trees and promoted sustainable agriculture. Land was redistributed from landlords to peasants. Local production and self-reliance were encouraged. "He who feeds you controls you," he said. Burkina Faso would feed itself. He sold off the government fleet of Mercedes cars and made the Renault 5, the cheapest car sold in Burkina Faso at that time, the official service car of the ministers. He reduced the salaries of well-off public servants, including his own, and forbade the use of government chauffeurs and first-class airline tickets. He launched public housing, built roads, and attacked corruption, selling off government luxury cars and reducing salaries. Sankara lived simply, proving a leader could serve, not enrich himself. His most radical reforms were for women fighting female genital mutilation, forced marriage, and polygamy. He appointed women to high office, encouraged them to work and join the military, and created a day for men to experience women's daily burdens. The revolution cannot triumph without the emancipation of women. He was changing not just policies, but the soul of his nation. Sankara's revolution inspired the oppressed, but threatened the powerful. France, the old colonial master, saw him as a dangerous precedent. Sankara openly challenged French influence, refusing to play the compliant leader. Neighbouring autocrats tied to France feared the Sankara contagion. Leaders like Félix Houphouët-Boigny of Ivory Coast saw him as a destabilizing force. They plotted in the shadows, determined to extinguish his revolution. Inside Burkina Faso, traditional chiefs, urban elites, and union leaders, stripped of privilege, formed a bitter opposition. They whispered, spread rumours, and painted Sankara as a dictator. The revolution was not a monolith. Factions and jealousies grew within the ruling council and the military. The very institution that brought him to power could destroy him. The price of dignity was isolation. The price of revolution he was about to learn was blood. Thomas Sankara sought to cut off foreign interest in Burkina Faso to achieve economic and political self-sufficiency, viewing debt and aid as forms of neo-colonialism that maintained dependency. He rejected loans from institutions like the IMF, believing they came with conditions that undermined his goals, and pursued an anti-imperialist foreign policy based on Pan-Africanism and self-reliance. Sankara famously stated, "He who feeds you controls you," and refused to accept loans from the IMF, seeing them as a new form of slavery that would prevent true development. He prioritized domestic development, launching programs for famine prevention, agricultural expansion, and land reform to make the country more food secure. He opposed foreign financial interests, and his government's policies led to very low foreign direct investment. Sankara's policies were rooted in a strong opposition to neo-colonialism. which he saw as the continued domination of Africa by former colonial powers. He promoted a radical, self-reliant form of Pan-Africanism, fostering alliances with other Third World nations and movements that opposed Western influence. His decision to rename the country from its French colonial name, Haute-Volta, to Burkina Faso, and to insist on the use of the Burkinabe people's name, was a clear assertion of cultural independence from France. His anti-imperialist stance and rejection of foreign financial control earned him the enmity of France, the US, and other Western powers. These powers and their allies in neighbouring countries allegedly worked to destabilise his government, culminating in the coup that led to his assassination in 1987. The IMF and World Bank would want Thomas Sankara gone because his policies directly opposed their interests. He rejected foreign aid that imposed debt and austerity, nationalized resources instead of privatizing them, and pursued an economic agenda that prioritized national sovereignty and self-sufficiency over their neo-colonial models. His rejection of debt austerity regimes was a significant threat to their influence in the global South. Sankara famously stated that debt was a tool of reconquest and refused to pay Burkina Faso's foreign debt, arguing it was illegitimately accrued and hindering development. This challenged the fundamental mechanism of power and financial control held by the IMF and World Bank. He prioritized national self-sufficiency by nationalizing key resources and pushing for food sovereignty, rather than following the privatization and foreign aid-dependent models favored by the IMF and World Bank. His policies were a direct challenge to the established international economic order. By rejecting foreign aid and loans that came with conditions, he undermined the institution's ability to dictate economic policies to developing nations. Sankara promoted a radical alternative vision for development that was based on endogenous growth, social equality, and anti-imperialism. This was a direct threat to the dominant neoliberal economic prescriptions the IMF and World Bank promoted globally. By 1987, the air in Ouagadougou was thick with betrayal. Sankara sensed the darkness closing in. His speeches grew fatalistic. "You cannot kill ideas," he said, as if writing his own eulogy. The betrayal came from his closest friend, Blaise Compaoré. Ambition corroded loyalty. Compaoré distanced himself, influenced by external enemies and promises of power. He consolidated power in the army, spread disinformation, and made secret pacts with Ivory Coast and France. Sankara was warned, but perhaps could not believe it. Compaoré would want Thomas Sankara gone for power and control. Sankara, a charismatic revolutionary, was opposed to many of the capitalist and neo-colonial policies that Compaoré and France supported. Sankara's radical agenda, which included denouncing the IMF and advocating for women's rights, alienated him from many of his fellow officers. By removing Sankara, Compaoré could seize the presidency for himself, dismantle Sankara's policies, and restore the country's ties to France. Sankara's removal would allow Compaoré to seize the presidency and enrich himself through the country's resources, which Sankara had previously sought to use for the people. Sankara was a strong socialist and anti-imperialist who challenged France's influence in the region. His policies were a stark contrast to Compaoré's, who supported a return to closer ties with Western powers and institutions like the IMF. Sankara's increasingly radical and isolated political position, which had alienated many within the military, created internal opposition to his rule. Compaoré was able to exploit this internal dissent to his advantage. Compaoré's actions after the coup, such as privatizing state-owned companies and re-engaging with the IMF, represented a direct reversal of Sankara's revolutionary policies. This suggests Compaoré's ultimate goal was to end Sankara's revolutionary movement and restore the previous system. On October 15, 1987, Sankara and his advisors were meeting at the Conseil de l'Entente headquarters location around 4:15 p.m. Commandos loyal to Compaoré make their move. The attack began with the killing of Sankara's driver and bodyguards in the courtyard, followed by a direct assault storming the meeting room where Sankara and 12 aides were. Sankara stood up, reportedly saying, "It's me they want," and walked out with his hands raised to face the attackers. He was shot multiple times and died instantly, executed. No trial, no arrest. Sankara was dead. The gunmen then stormed the meeting room and opened fire on the remaining officials. 12 people inside were killed, with only one survivor, Aluna Traoré, who feigned death. That night, the revolution died. The upright man was struck down and buried in a makeshift grave. The darkness had swallowed the light. By that evening, Compaoré then declared himself president, overthrowing the government and reversing Sankara's policies, citing strained relations with neighbouring countries and France as justification for the coup. Compaoré began reversing Sankara's leftist policies with a policy of rectification for foreign power of his France masters. The official story was a lie. Compaoré's regime claimed Sankara died resisting arrest, but the truth was a cold-blooded execution. Compaoré was the immediate beneficiary, dismantling reforms and ruling for 27 years as a Western ally. But he was not alone. The shadow of France loomed large. Declassified documents suggest French complicity and support for the coup. Regional powers like Ivory Coast, threatened by Sankara's revolution, aided the plot. The United States, wary of Sankara's leftist ties, looked the other way. The assassination was a convergence of internal ambition and external neo-colonial agendas. Compaoré was simply the instrument. The system of power and profit that Sankara defied was the true culprit. When Thomas Sankara was killed, it was discovered that all of his personal property consisted of an old Peugeot car that he had purchased before assuming power, a broken refrigerator, 3 guitars and 4 bicycles, in contrast to many African leaders who prioritized accumulating wealth. To avoid looking impoverished in front of others who can't afford such pleasures, he requested that air conditioning not be installed in his office. The foreign country most supportive of Blaise Compaoré's regime was France, which has historically maintained significant influence in its former colonies, though other nations also played a role. While France was a major player, the actual support level varied and involved other international actors too, such as those supporting or opposing his regime. As the former colonial power, France has historically maintained significant economic, military and political influence in Burkina Faso and other West African nations, which could be interpreted as a form of support for a stable regime. Canada's economic interests in Burkina Faso, particularly in the mining sector, may have influenced the relationship between the two countries during Compaoré's rule, although the support was complex and often tied to resource extraction rather than direct political support. Compaoré played a role as a mediator in other regional conflicts and maintained relations with neighbouring states, which could be seen as both a form of support and a political tool. International organisations like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank provided financial support to Burkina Faso during Compaoré's rule, which could be interpreted as support for the regime's economic policies. In April 2022, Compaoré France Connected left him hanging. He was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the assassination, though he has lived in exile with his allies in Ivory Coast since 2014, and it is unlikely he will serve the sentence. Is hope in Africa doomed? If Thomas Sankara has survival, he would have been repeatedly subjected to everything from economic sanctions to outright military intervention from not only his West African neighbours, but Europe and the US, First World, as a whole. Socialist governments, unfortunately, in my opinion, have never been truly given a chance by the rest of the world, mainly because they represent an existential threat to the current world order. Maybe it is an inferior economic system, but I don't think we've given it a fair enough chance to compete yet for us to say so with confidence. I would say for Sankara's government best case would be he ends up a Fidel Castro-like figure, and his party stays in power to the present day, but hampered by international sanctions, again much like Cuba. This would require Soviet support for it to succeed. Sankara's story suggests not. He proved a different Africa was possible, free from corruption and dependency. For that, he was murdered, but you cannot kill an idea. The seeds he planted, dignity, self-reliance, Pan-African pride, waited for the rain. In 2014, a popular uprising inspired by Thomas Sankaра's legacy drove Compaoré from power. The France didn't like that. Sankara's ideas inspire a new generation seeking true independence. The light was swallowed by darkness, but its spectre still illuminates the path forward.